What's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates, your mental activist for this pop-up politically conscious episode 3. Trying to get my brother Emille Bryant on. Let's see if I can add him to the stage. Can you hear me, Emille?
I can hear you loud and clear. I'm just getting my camera up.
Okay, got you. All right, brother. Let's see if we can get this thing going. All right, here we go. All right, y'all. So we pulled this it's literally a pop-up. We just agreed just a few hours ago. If you caught episode 2, we highlighted that we were going to break down the Electoral College. Anybody can go look it up and see what it is. We also wanted to have some dialogue around, in my opinion, a dialogue that is needed quite often. Is the Electoral College fair or not? And I'm just saying that just from a simple standpoint, because a statement I always hear, Emille, if you will, is we don't even select the president. I hear it all the time, right? Like, and so it's almost like you have no choice in it because the Electoral College, or sometimes a mysterious day, selects the college. Selects the president, if you will. And so, sorry about the rough start, y'all. We're getting everything started. But Emille, let me let you introduce yourself.
Emille Bryant. I'm an author and consultant, management consultant. I guide people through hard work called self-development, and I also guide businesses through the same. In both cases, I help people confront the things that block them from the success they define and seek. It's my joy to do that, and I'm a political junkie, which means that although I'm not fingers on the pulse of current events, I'm fingers on the pulse of the ramifications from those current events. I like to understand why things are happening and not just what is happening.
Glad to have you on again, brother, for this episode 3. With that said, what we do here, if you haven't seen Politically Conscious yet, we look at clips and react to them. And so this clip will be one in which we are getting the Electoral College explained, and we will respond and get into the conversation I just talked about. So let me pop this up, and we will respond.
It is the most unusual college in the country.
The Electoral College is almost as old as the country itself, but it's been constitutionally challenged by some estimates more than 800 times. The Electoral College is a system where Americans do not vote directly for a presidential candidate. Rather, each state gets a number of electors appointed by political parties. Electors ultimately choose their state's winning candidate. Quick history lesson. In 48 states and D.C., the candidate winning the state's popular vote gets all the state's electoral votes. The number of electors for each state matches the sum of its senators and representatives. It started as a compromise between our founding fathers in 1787.
And there was the fear that democracy could lead to mobocracy and that you would have what some people would call majority tyranny.
And then there was slavery.
You saw slave states trying to not count slaves as people, but then trying to have it both ways by having them at least partially counted so that they could increase their population numbers.
Ultimately, the founding fathers gave states the power to appoint electors who would select the president. The United States has a total of 538 electors. A majority of 270 votes is needed to win the presidency. Usually, the candidate who wins 270 also wins the popular vote, but not always. Like in 1876, when Rutherford Hayes lost the popular vote but won by just one electoral vote. Or most recently in 2016, when former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton lost despite beating Donald Trump by nearly 3 million in the popular vote. As of April 2024, 17 states and D.C. are leaning toward the popular vote, adopting the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which awards all electoral votes to the winner of the majority. Still, for the upcoming election, the Founding Fathers' electoral system remains, and so too does the contention.
So I think that simply explains the Electoral College.
Yes.
But to a degree, I think from a lack of civics or teaching or learning or remembering, if you will, because I'm pretty sure everybody's taught that at a minimum in our public education. I heard this morning. The public school the public food education is what I heard today. That was pretty interesting to hear it referred to as that. But with that said, that's simplifying it. The question becomes, why do we have the Electoral College? So that we can get into the dialogue of if even we, the people, are we actually selecting the president? Which I will say, just as a quick thought and opinion, we are selecting the president, despite the fact that we have the Electoral College. But again, that was the explanation. Emille, if you will, jump into that dialogue, because I'm pretty sure you've heard that plenty of times before. We don't even select the president. Somebody else is selecting the president.
So this is this is one of those moments where we use a lot of colloquial language, and it frustrates me because the colloquial language confuses people. People say, hey, we are in a democracy. No, we're in a republic or a constitutional democracy. A democracy is what's called a direct democracy. Some people remember from their world history, the Greeks advanced this concept of a direct democracy. Everybody votes for everything. And sort of that's where the term mob rule comes from. You take a simple majority, whatever the simple majority wants, that's what becomes determinant. And so there's this problem with direct democracies. One, they're very, very messy. It's a very difficult to get everybody to vote on everything all the time, right? Because you got to mass these people. So what the founders of this nation did, so, I look at the founders as both villain and hero, right? So I'm going to talk about their hero side for a while, and then we'll get to the villain side, because the Electoral College is a result of the villain side of this, right? So we're going to talk about both sides of these founders. I don't call them founding fathers for many reasons, but these founders were in the heroic thought, were able to find a buffer for that direct democracy, right? The direct democracy was too unwieldy. So the constitutional republic was the solution that they came up with, to vote for representatives, much like what ancient Rome did, right? Where they had senators that represented certain groups of people, typically geographic regions of people. So you had senators from what is now called Spain, what is now called France, what is now called Germany, what's now called Britain. Those senators were all part of the Roman ruling class. They were elected by people in those provinces around Rome, and the founders adopted that model, touched it up, modernized it for the 18th century, and came up with what we have in our Constitution. So now we have this representative democracy. The people still vote and decide, but they're not deciding on issue by issue. They're deciding on representatives whose job is to advance the agenda. And the agenda is twofold. People always forget this. The people's agenda, what they say they want, and what the representative tells them they will do. So when you vote for a representative, you're voting for two things. You're saying, hey, representative, I want X. And the representative says, I will represent you for Y and Z. When they overlap, people are very happy. When they don't overlap, they're bad. And so what's supposed to happen is, in a representative democracy, when your representative either doesn't uphold what he or she promised, or they do not advance the agenda you as the voter said, they're out of here, right? So this is all part of the representative democracy. Well, the heroes really solved this problem of what could be a growing nation. They foresaw the nation growing. They knew it would grow. They didn't know it would grow to 380 million people, but they respected the fact that there would be more and more people joining the union as it was. So now we have this context, right? A representative democracy.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of run you through so we can,
right.
Get some dialogue.
But now so this question was, how do you pick a leader of this representative democracy? And they wanted to do. There were lots of ways that they had proposed.
Let's get to let's run
but
it through.
What we ended up with was a college of people that represents all 535 of the representatives elected to Congress. 100 senators, 435 House of Representatives. That was a compromise from the enslavers and the people who did not want slavery. That was a direct compromise from that, because the people who were representing slavery, They wanted something that gave them more power than than the numbers would have authorized. And they were afraid that they would always lose whatever argument was coming, and therefore they would lose slavery at some point to the abolitionists. The abolitionists were like, we don't want to break the Union into pieces unnecessarily. So the compromise was Black lives. You guys can have more power in the Electoral College to pick the president. And then there were some rules that have changed over the years based on that. So this context of representative democracy is how we got to the
election. Let me ask you a question about that. Why do you suggest that was to give more power in the Electoral College? Like, you got to explain that, because I don't know if I see it that way. So I'm willing to hear why you say that.
Right. So if you go back to the original Constitution, right, there was the 3/5 compromise, and that is that all of the enslaved people in America would be counted, and then 3/5 of that number would be counted for population purposes.
Right.
So the North was afraid that would overpower the South. On the flip side, once they had established,
the North was afraid Well, I'm saying, you're saying they pushed it down to 3/5 is what you mean. Like, let's make sure we get.
That's correct, right? Okay. Instead of it being so the problem was you had. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to tell you how to jump. I want to connect this to the Electoral College, because I'm
absolutely
okay.
Right. So that even the odds, as it were, right? So if you had all these Black people, but they couldn't vote, right? So you have people counted for power, but they don't get the chance to say what happens with that power.
Yeah, right. I'm trying to rush you through with me so we can get to it.
I get it. All right. So on the flip side, once that was established, now you have the other problem. The other problem is how does the South maintain its power given that it was given that disadvantage? Well, now the Electoral College comes on, and so you have 2 senators for every state. So that's a disproportionate amount of power for each state. So the slave states had a disproportionate amount of power relative to what they could have had based on the number of senators. When you combine senators and representatives, and I don't want to get too detailed because, again, you're trying to speed me up, but basically the problem is that the South was able to wield more effect in the Electoral College than its numbers would have indicated otherwise.
So I'm gonna throw this out because, again, I want to challenge that real quick, and then we'll keep the dialogue going. So I think if you have enslavement or don't have enslavement, the way the Electoral College plays out right now is how it should play out, regardless of whether you have enslavement. I think you're bringing in a context that I don't think has anything to do with the Electoral College. And the only reason I say that is because the overall idea of the Electoral College, and you can definitely challenge this. I'm cool, but I'm saying this is my understanding.
For sure.
The overall the idea of the Electoral College is so that the smaller, lower populous states will have fair representation. Because if you had just simply a populist vote, then there is a reality that the politician is kind of what happened in early times because the population was so spread out around the country. But for the most part, the actual politicians for the nation would only focus on the most populous locations. So I think that's a reality regardless of the 3/5 compromise. Now, I understand that you're factoring in how that plays out, but I don't think the Electoral College was simply because of enslavement or I should say simply.
I would never say simply because I wouldn't reduce it to that.
Yeah, let me jump out of that. But I'm saying if you take enslavement out, I think the Electoral College is absolutely necessary. It's partly the reason why we see the primary start in New Hampshire. If we didn't have no Electoral College, no president would ever go to New Hampshire. Ever. like I'm saying, so I respect that you're putting that lens on it, but I think that lens is improper for what I would say is the understanding of we don't even select the president. And if you could add some clarity to what I'm saying, because I know you could explain it better than me. And I'm just saying, if you take the enslavement lens off of it at surface, the Electoral College makes sense.
I will. Let me sort of change tack to help me explain this better. Small states matter, but it depends on where they are. New Hampshire matters. It's a small state because it's in the East Coast. Hawaii doesn't matter. It's on the West Coast. And I know this sounds kind of funky, but Hawaii is a small state. Presidents never go there. Presidential candidates rarely go to Hawaii because even though it's a small state, and even though it has a very similar number of electors in the Electoral College as New Hampshire, it's all the way out west. It has just less effect. So this context of small states having say matters to a degree, right? Hawaii doesn't have the same say as New Hampshire. And we can talk about why that is, East Coast versus West Coast, and a bunch of different reasons, and the fact that Hawaii was last in the union.
Well, I would like to keep moving so we don't get
right.
That
so,
door.
But the small state, big state dichotomy that you're talking about is exactly why the House of Representatives is apportioned the way it is. It's exactly why senators were created in the first place. The Electoral College, however, was a compromise for not just that reason. And you have to go back to 1803 and talk about Jefferson Burr and a really weird way that presidents were elected prior to the Electoral College to get into it. And I won't do that. So I will tell people who are listening, when you research why the Electoral College is the way it is and why someone like me thinks it is a bit skewed toward the formerly slave-holding states, look up Jefferson Burr 1803 and you'll understand what the compromise was from that makes the Electoral College look the way it does. I will say this, that the Electoral College does not represent the will of the people in the way people expect it to. The expectation is popular vote. But a state like Texas or California, which has lots of Electoral College votes, has less say in the Electoral College than a state like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, what are called swing states, right? Ohio, Florida now, right? And that is because although they're massive states with lots of electors, they don't necessarily have the power of a state that is on the bubble of going one way or another, given our bilateral system, right? There's two parties. And so you have a solidly blue state like California, a solidly red state like Texas, and then you have states like Pennsylvania that might go red or might go blue. And so what happens is a few thousand people in a state like those,
right, absolutely,
can determine.
I think in general, I think there's enough explanation publicly to understand a purple state and the power that it has.
For sure.
Yep. And I would offer that, in my opinion, because you've skewed, in my opinion, what the Electoral College does from a black standpoint. I think in my opinion, you have it skewed to where I think you missed the boat on whether we the people select. And what I mean by that is like, for example, the rules of the states where the majority of states, I think all but two, those electorates have to go with the popular vote right now, currently in 48 out of 50 states. You could correct me if I'm wrong on that. I know part of the argument for power to be skewed is some of the states are considering going away from that here in the new future, and some of that's being led by what we've seen happen in the last two elections. At least that's some of the information that I'm getting, and I'll see. So if you understand kind of where I'm going with this, I'm more focused on the concept of people in our community believing that we don't select the president. And so I want to highlight understanding that the Electoral College is not going away from, or to even explain how Hillary can win by 3 million. Because if you simplify that, oh, well, Hillary won by 3 million, and for those who say we don't select the president anyway, they're actually of the belief that their vote doesn't matter. So I'm trying to go deeper with that. When the reality is that 3 million is just because California has so many people. Like, we got to be able to have that context before people keep moving away and thinking the Electoral College is selecting our president over us. That's not true. That's the dialogue we should be having, in my opinion. But
all right, so thank you for that. Let me back up and go forward. I think I understand better what you're saying, and you said it very clearly. I'm going to restate it slightly. The reason why the popular vote isn't a good measure is because states like California would definitely rule the roost. California, Texas, New York, Florida, they would just rule because by the numbers, they can outweigh or outmeasure Wyoming and Colorado and New Hampshire and Iowa and all these smaller population states, but their concerns matter too. So the question would be, how do we balance the needs of the few who are in those
places? And I would just go to move the conversation quicker. The Electoral College does that by doing the 2 electorals and taking the population. That compromise
absolutely
helps do that. And and it's not me trying to be right. It's explaining that the 2 senators plus the number based on the representatives in each, that number that each states get is relatively a fair compromise to ensure that the populace alone doesn't overtake, and then the 2 senators, which, to your point, gives a little more power. You see what I'm saying?
Because it's the all or none. I think
people actually brilliant.
With the all or none part of it.
It's actually brilliant.
Again, that's the hero part of the founders, and I agree. I think people struggle with the all or none part. So let's really focus on that. I think that's where the confusion lies. Why someone can win by 3 million in the popular vote and still lose the Electoral College, right? So 48 states have a rule that says whatever the number, whoever wins the popular vote in that state gets all of the electors for that state, right? Maine and Nebraska are the only 2 that allow a split based on the numbers, right? So if it's a 60-40 in the popular vote, it's a 60-40 split for the electors. I think people would be more comfortable with the Electoral College if all the states had that rule and it was maybe reversed.
See, I don't think enough of us even know that it was only 2. And so so even when you're suggesting that people will be more comfortable, so at the end of the day, I'm actually saying you should be comfortable, because understand, whatever your vote, if you are populous in your state, unless you're in Maine, and what's the other one?
Nebraska.
Okay, so unless you're in Maine and Nebraska, then don't. I'm just saying the dialogue, you shouldn't have that fear, because that's not what's happening. Like people need to understand that, because people actually think that the Electoral College is just doing what it wants to do.
Right. No, and
that's the bigger context for the general population, in my opinion.
Let me read something to you from the archives.gov website, right? So I'm always trying to go to primary sources. I do not like secondary sources or analysis, right? So it's real quick. It says from archives.gov, the Electoral College allocation, all states except for Maine and Nebraska have a winner-take-all policy, where the state looks only at the overall winner of the statewide popular vote. Maine and Nebraska, however, appoint individual electors based on the winner of the popular vote within each congressional district, and then 2 at-large electors based on the winner of the overall statewide popular vote. So we're here talking about the Electoral College in a very fine way. The fine way is that every other state besides Maine and Nebraska, 51% of the people vote for one person. All of that state's electors go to that person. And that happens in 48 of the 50 states. Maine and Nebraska are 2 very small states. So they don't, if California had it, I promise you it would be a different race, or Texas had that, it'd be a different race.
The conversation would be different.
Completely. So when people ask, how can you win the popular vote and lose the Electoral College or lose the election? This is how. Because we're not looking at every state's split for electors. We're looking at instead that each state has a winner-take-all policy, and unfortunately, the winner-take-all policy makes it look like it's unfair. It's not unfair in the context we've been talking about, but it looks like it because people don't understand that winner-take-all means that 49% of a state's votes potentially are, I won't say ignored, but under the rules of the system, the winner gets everything.
And that just to be clear for anybody listening or watching, that rule is how you ensure in your state, unless you're in Maine or Nebraska, that the popular vote is done. It is what's done. So
absolutely.
So it's like I just need people to understand the Electoral College is not acting as a third party.
It is not independent
and putting in the president that they've always selected. Like I'm saying, these are the conspiracies that
Absolutely.
go along with the lack of understanding the civics.
There is the
electoral
potential for a tie in the Electoral College. There is that potential.
And that's where you go to the VP.
There's a set of ways to resolve that solution. We won't get into it, but the reason why there was a problem on January 6, 2021 is because somebody wanted to activate those rules when those rules were not being activated by the numbers. The numbers would dictate the activation of the rule, not the arbitrary decision of an individual. This is why people get squirrely about the Electoral College, because they think it's falling under some special set of rules where you can just willy-nilly decide. No, every state. Now, this is the part I really want to make sure people understand, because it's a very powerful point. Every state has its own set of rules as to how its electors are sent to the Electoral College. And every state has a process by which they must certify the electors after the election is done. So the election happens tomorrow, November 5th. There's a period of time where the votes get counted, recounted, and then if there's any protests or challenges, those protests and challenges are entertained, resolved, and then, and only then, and there's a very specific date, I can't think of it today, where the states must certify their election and therefore certify who their electors are voting for in the Electoral College. That process is incredibly fair to both candidates, or all candidates if there's a third party or fourth party.
Right.
That process allows for challenges. It allows for counts and recounts. It allows for disruptive things happening to make sure that there's, when a state certifies, there's a state, Hawaii, 1960 election, they sent two sets of electors. The state authorized two sets of electors to go to the Electoral College. Why did they do that? Because they were in the middle of a recount and they couldn't certify by the date. So they said, we'll send two. And when we finally figure out the exact count, we will authorize one of them to vote in the Electoral College. But they didn't know.
Because they only have one elector, just to give that clarity to the.
Right. So they wanted to make sure that it was the right person and they were by the rules. Right. Everybody else meets the criteria.
So let's just give some clarity on that. They sent two for anybody listening, hearing that for the first time. So they sent two electors who were for each candidate. And then once they were able to certify their actual votes, the elector that's for that candidate was the one that was actually used, which still aligned with their populist vote. We got a question for somebody who joined late. So we kind of touched bases on this already, but we'll try to make it super quick. So somebody just said, joining late, how did the effect of the 2006, I think it meant 2016, Hillary Clinton loss due to the electoral vote? We already kind of explained it, but let's explain it again for somebody who just joined. I'm gonna give it to you, Emille. Give the quick response.
Oh, for sure. So the reason why Hillary lost is because let's just use California as an example. Let's say California voted 2 million plus, and everybody else was even. Well, California's all or none electors all went for Hillary, but every other state had a different split than that, right? So that's how Hillary lost. Is there was a state or a couple of states where she won big by the numbers, by the popular vote, but because the Electoral College didn't reflect the numbers of those votes within that state beyond the electors already slated for that state, she lost the Electoral College. She didn't lose the popular vote in the context of overall across all 50 states, but they were concentrated in one state. And therefore, the Electoral College could not reflect that popular vote because it was all concentrated. In this case, I'm saying California, it was actually several other states. Right. But basically, the concentration of the votes for her overwhelmed, did not reflect what the Electoral College voted, how the Electoral College voted.
Yep, Iris, I hope that explains it. And just to give one piece more clarity, and we're going to move kind of off of this, and you can go back and watch earlier part of the show as well. But just to kind of just give one piece of clarity, because again, I know you just jumped in. It's the Electoral College protects from the Californians and the Texas being where the candidates spend all their money trying to get all of those votes. All right, she said she got it. Perfect. I just wanted to give that clarity. But yeah, so that's what the Electoral College actually protects you and me from having a lesser vote than all the people in California.
The only modification I would make to the Electoral College in 2024 and beyond is that every state should split its electors based on the popular vote. That's the only change I would make.
Which again, it's not okay that Maine and Nebraska, small populous states, don't do that. But I would make it so that those two do it too. And now there's no issue.
Right. Like so if you wanted, and there is a way to make that happen. If you can get enough people in Congress to agree, or enough people in state legislatures to agree, we can propose a constitutional amendment to change how the Electoral College operates. That's okay. But the only way for the Electoral College to reflect the popular vote is for every state to split its electors based on the popular vote. And only 2 states do that. Everybody else is all or none.
Which means we're good on 48. We just need the last 2 to do it. I want to make sure we keep.
I want the will of the people served. And
yeah, but I'm highlighting. But let's keep it in context. We got 48 doing it, Emille. So I'm like, so you keep making it seem like
what I'm saying is 2 states do it the way I want it done.
Scared of I agree with you, but I'm just saying, still keep in context that 48 are doing what you want. And it would be nice if it was an amendment that required them to do it. Because to your point, it's left up to them if they ever wanted to change it. And that's an issue. Like that's part of the push that's going on now with the delaying of So I do want to be fair and give you credence to why you want it to be an amendment, because of some of the pushes that are going on now. We talked about the last couple of shows that the disenfranchisement of your vote is part of politics. So your amendment would protect us as the people of that not being a possibility.
And
so I agree with your amendment, but I do want to highlight before people take it and be like, oh, it's still something to be scared of. Right now, 48 are doing what you want. I just want to make sure that's understood more than anything.
My point would be very, very much that people, when it seems arcane and most of us learned this in our high school civics class. And unfortunately, a lot of us slept through high school civics, or we said, I graduated, dump out, and all that stuff. So we have people who are thinking that their vote is wasted. And what you and I have talked about, we're both activists in that we do more than just vote in order to change our communities. We want our communities uplifted. We want our communities healthy. But we also realize that voting is an essential part of that activism. So what I want people to do is be informed about what happens to their vote after they cast it. And one of the things that confuses people is that this Electoral College seems to come out of nowhere every 4 years and decide the fate of the nation. When in fact, there is a very specific policy that happens. And there are experts on all campaigns, whether it's small party or large party, third party or main party. Their expertise is figuring out how to finesse the Electoral College and win the presidency. They're figuring out where are those Electoral College votes most at stake? Where can they most spend money? So California is solidly blue and Texas is solidly red. But there are other places, like we talked about with the swing states, the purple states. But then there's another element to that too, which is in each state, what are the proper ways to ensure that state stays in that camp once they've gotten in there? So the message in Maine is going to sound different than the message in Iowa, which is going to sound different than the message in New Mexico. And what people should know is that's all Electoral College politics. That's all about the Electoral College, making sure that you are building that case for 270 plus votes in the Electoral College. So if President Trump goes to some place and says one thing one way and then goes to another place and says something another way, he's appealing to that Electoral College vote. He's not just appealing to a voter specifically.
And let me line this up. Yeah, let me line this up and I'm gonna play another clip. And let me line up what you're saying. So understand, again, if you have understood some of what we've explained, that the Electoral College is not some third party that's not listening to us, like we've already kind of been through all that. But what Emille just broke down is actually the exact same thing that would play out if we had a populist vote. The only difference in the Electoral College, again, I just want to make sure people understand this, guards against they're spending too much time in Texas, California, and the populous states. So to Emille's point, they're trying to maneuver to get the Electoral College based on trying to manipulate the numbers that are available. It's the same thing they would do with the populace, but it still makes sure that the Iowas that are less populated, the Nebraskas that are less populated, that they are in play. So again, don't take what he just explained as some type of manipulation that wouldn't happen anyway if we had an Electoral College or not. It's not some type of manipulation of some college that's not a part of us. It's just what's done, since one, that is the system, but that system has a protective leg on those in less populous states and getting their needs met. So I always wanted to make sure people understood that and know
it's a great point. It's a great point, because one of the challenges that we see in modern politics is that we see issues, but we don't see context for those issues.
Exactly.
Right? And the context of those issues has to do with, how do I make sure a voter who is happy with a certain way of life or a certain agenda, right, that they maintain their vote. No one swoops in and says, hey, I've got an alternate agenda or an agenda that looks better to you than the one that you would ordinarily support. So that agenda varies state to state. The rural states, the farm states are going to have a different agenda than the states that are heavily urban. That's okay. That's part of the political process, because one candidate has to govern 380 million people. Like, that's the president is the president for 380 million Americans. So there's going to be nuances in how they talk to different audiences within that 380 million. We should expect that. What we should also expect is that them talking to one audience doesn't conflict with what I want on my agenda in my part of the agenda, right? So we want a consistent agenda, even though pieces of that agenda may look different to different parts of the country for different voters. That's okay. What we want, though, is a way to understand and reconcile why they're doing what they're doing. And the context of every presidential election is one person is trying to win an election across 50 U.S. states. And that is not going to be a consistent singular message to all broadcast from the moon to America. It's going to be a very personable, very individual conversation across all 50 states. And what we're seeing is in electoral politics, it's not different in the sense that they're doing something weird. What they're doing is they're making sure that all 380 million Americans are hearing something that allows them to vote for the agenda that presidential candidate represents.
Right. And I want to be clear, it represents, and the candidate themselves absolutely understands the need to get your vote. As a populace, your one vote does matter, even though we have an electoral college. And I shouldn't even say even though, if we connected the dots to how it always connected. But because we've constantly had those dialogues, we've assumed that even you explaining, hey, this is how you manipulate the electoral college, because I know how we misunderstand the term, people will still think that doesn't include them. And so that's the clarity that I think Politically Conscious wanted to bring to the table today, and I think we've done that. But speaking of, again, a day before the vote, here's a clip that I think we should respond to based on the last conversation. So let's jump into this as well.
Time to hold the vote until we get something. It's time to hold the vote until we get something.
Anybody telling you that you gotta vote, be skeptical.
I want you to spot the difference between the way that right-wing conservatives are talking about voting and the way that people allegedly interested in progress are talking about voting. Every election cycle, someone insists that black folks, for one reason or another, should not vote.
Hold the vote until we get something.
But have you ever noticed that conservative white people are rarely, maybe even never, told that they should be withholding their vote? In fact, this is what white Christian nationalists have been saying to each other in plain sight for decades.
They want everybody to vote. I don't want everybody to vote.
That's Paul Weyrich back in 1980.
Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now.
He's a godfather in the modern conservative movement, and he co-founded the Heritage Foundation. Yes, the folks who have been producing the document known as Project 2025 for the last 40 plus years.
As a matter of fact, our leverage in the
So I wanted to bring that to the table because if you recall, our last conversation was, us breaking down what you're actually getting for your vote. And as you beautifully highlighted on the last conversation, you're not going to see a legislation or a law or an act that says for Black people, right? We just highlighted understanding how all these different laws, as you said, I forgot the word you kept using, but you kept saying it affects us. It was a word you kept, it was beautiful. You kept saying it, how they affect us materially. Materially, I think that's what something
mm-hmm. Material effect of a law on a specific group like us. See, as much as I enjoy Dr. Umar and Ice Cube, I cannot stand the thought that withholding a vote is somehow power. It is not power, because what it does is it surrenders power to the people who do vote. It magnifies the effect of their vote, because now when you withhold your vote, you are now saying to them, you pick, you decide on my behalf until I get what I want. But the way that I get what I want, just as it's been demonstrated in the past, especially in the past 16 years since the election of Barack Obama, a small group of very dedicated voters can have an outsized effect on politics. A small group of dedicated voters can have an outsized effect on an agenda. And the name of that group in 2008, 2009 was called the Tea Party. They were not a large group of people, but man, they struck fear in the hearts of representatives across the country, across the Republican Party. Why? Because they were almost fanatical about voting in every single election. And what happened was, instead of surrendering their vote and saying, if you don't give me what I want, I don't play, they said, if you don't give me what I want, I'll create havoc for you. I will make your life hell
during primaries.
Your ability to get reelected.
During primaries.
Primaries are the most powerful part of the electoral process, and nobody gets it. I wish people understood. If the turnout for this election is going to be ridiculous, it's going to be very high, somewhere in the neighborhood of 65% ish. But in primaries across the country, off years, and when I say off years, I don't mean like the
this is non-presidential.
I'm talking about like the odd year election, the 2021.
Yeah, the non-presidential. The non-presidential, which is every year. Every year except for every 4 years. All the non-presidentials. That's what
all the non-presidentials.
Yeah, go ahead.
And here's what I'm saying is those little tiny elections that people don't go to, and you say, oh, the candidates are terrible. The candidates are terrible because you didn't vote in the primary. You didn't pick a person that you wanted that could have been more radical, that could have been more progressive or more conservative or more liberal or more center.
Or more to your point, that's exactly what the Tea Party did to become the force they eventually became and surprised the Republicans because they were killing the primaries.
They were, when I say fanatical, their turnout within the Tea Party was incredibly robust, right? And you can go back and look at the numbers, but they controlled politics. Because if you don't get past the primary, you don't get reelected to Congress. You don't get reelected to anything. So their point was, we're going to exercise our vote where it matters most, where it hurts you the most. And then another person from that party who's not the incumbent, who doesn't have the inertia of residency, right, can come in and make those changes. And they knew that power. So instead of hearing hold your vote, which surrenders power, we should be saying, if they don't hear you, you go to that primary and you get them out of here. It doesn't matter who you replace them with. The point is you get them out of here. You're not going to play the game where my vote's taken for granted. My vote matters.
And I've always offered this solution, which I know is kind of scary to our community just based on how we've been voting, in a sense, since the 60s or whatever. I've always kind of indicted, and some of this understanding came from me just, learning from Dr. Claude Anderson, on his perspective on the African-American vote. being more of a block vote, which I'm still kind of, in a sense, a fan of per se. And I'm not saying every black person has to vote the same way or whatever, but I just wanted to make sure I give credit to the concept I gave. It started with some of his teachings or whatever. And so what I've come to believe and have said on the YouTube page years ago, and have been pushing it throughout the mental dialogue community, is the idea that, like, versus, to your point, versus holding the vote, I would love to see us willing to actually vote people out, which would require not doing the hold the vote and not show up, but it actually will require, all right, let's go vote for the opposite party. I'm talking about in a local way. Like, let's take the president. I know people are, I'm not talking about the presidency with this, but in order, because what we all understand is money controls politics. And so when you understand that money controls politics, to a degree, you can get a little apathy and say, yeah, what does my one vote matter? I don't know this politician. I don't know these people, or they're not speaking to me. And so the people with money are going to control them anyway. So there's a lot of truth in that, right? Like, what is it? What is it? Citizens Trust? What is the one?
Citizens United.
Yeah, Citizens United. I can't stand it. Stand it.
Agree.
Whatever. But I'm kind of, which allows all the money to go into to these parties for anybody that's listening. But I'm saying, but my point is, but how your one vote could matter over the money is to take the Tea Party blueprint in your locality. I'm here in Atlanta, for example, is to take the Tea Party blueprint and literally say, okay, politician, you promised us this, and now you've become the incumbent, and just kind of expect that we're going to vote and you're just going to get that space. So I would love the way without, despite the money, for all of us to be willing to vote opposite party. I don't care what's behind the name, D or R, but we go block vote and prove to that incumbent we will get them out of office. Because to not vote allows that incumbent to stay on and never have to answer to you. So I would love to see wherever we have numbers, because this only take place where we have larger populations of African Americans, right? To be willing to jump, like I say, locally, stateside, to oust someone out. And people say, well, dang, what about the policies you're going to get when the other side is or whatever? I say, once we prove that we will oust you no matter what, now both sides will come to us and say, what the hell do you want? Because once we prove that we're not going to be 80% one way, because we're the only block that's 80% one way.
Right.
I'm just saying on a local level. So if anybody's listening, don't get your panties up in the wide.
Do not misquote the brother.
I'm not misquote the brother right now. I'm just talking about effectively using politics locally, because at the end of the day, politics is way more local than ever being concerned about what any president's going to do.
Last show I talked about how your day-to-day life is determined more by who's a mayor and who's a governor than you really understand. So all the money is mad money is spent on the presidential campaigns. $3 billion the last cycle, much more than that this cycle, and that's all the groups, the campaigns themselves, right.
You and me ain't getting invited to $1 million dinner because we can't pay it.
We ain't going. What we can do, see, it's money or votes. And what people don't understand, this is the part I wish people understood. Yes, there's money flowing into politics, but there's also money flowing out of politics. See, people, right? It used to be called the spoil system back in the day when things were much more openly corrupt than they are today, right? People think it's corrupt today. They have no idea. You go back to Tippecanoe and U.S. Grant. You go back to William Howard Taft and a bunch of other presidents and their administrations. OMG, you would not believe the amount of corruption, open corruption that was in those politics. I say that because money's flowing out of politics too. So the money that flows in has an effect, but the money that flows out has an effect. The difference is the money flowing out of a political campaign after someone wins and becomes the incumbent, that money affects you directly. So you should be getting the result of your vote in tangible benefits that you can see, not tangibles as in, oh, I asked for X and I didn't get it, therefore there are no tangibles. I'm talking about, are your schools working the way you want them to? Are your roads working the way you want to? Is your water clean? People are buying bottled water. I say vote for clean water. You should not ever have to pay for bottled water that you like. You should vote for a water system that works for you, because that is your right as a voter, as a citizen, to have your tax dollars do what you intend them to do. But we don't vote for those people who would keep our water clean, and we're not voting out the people who don't keep our water clean,
because the people that are going to, and to give that context, to put it in a personable context, what happens is, for those who are taking advantage of the primary and putting that person in, that person lives near them, so that person says, nope, don't put that plant over here, put it over there. So I'm just kind of put what you're saying in context. The representative is not aimed at aimed at ensuring that the money, the water pipes in the hood are messed up. That's not the aim. It's the lack of representation, because not enough of us voted in our locale to be able to put a person who says who's going to be on council to say, nope, don't put it here either.
Right.
So I'm just trying to put people in context. You know, the individual representative is just representing their locale. They're not, it's the, sometimes the not thinking of the other side of town is how not having representative can hurt you as well. It ain't even always, sometimes
it's not always intentional malice.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's never intentional, but I'm just kind of highlighting that here's how we misunderstand the power of the vote. Your representation is the exact reason that when the North-South compromise happened after the 12 years of reconstruction, when the North and the South make that compromise and the North finally pulls the military out of the South, that was the reason why the KKK went on a terror, not just to harm Black people. Their number one concern was, we can't let where they are populace at control their vote, because they're going to vote for a different interest. They're going to vote for their own interest. So the terror was to take away the vote.
One of the most powerful elements of Jim Crow was poll taxes and poll tests, preventing Black people from voting, keeping them away from exercising their constitutional right. I challenge people who say withhold the vote, which sparked this part of our conversation. I challenge them in this context, because I hate hearing that, is what has not voting gotten you? I have never heard an argument in all of my political reading that people who did not vote somehow got their agenda passed, somehow got their agenda heard, somehow got their agenda met. I don't see it in political teaching. I don't read about it. I don't understand it historically. Not voting has never been a tactic that got you what you wanted. The best it will do is not get you what you don't want, but it will not get you what you want. So to me, the question is, where do you use your vote? Where is it most powerful? And remember what we said earlier, a small population of fanatical voters can have an outsized effect on politics. Yes. So the question is, can you generate that? Barack Obama was a community organizer. Do you know one of the most powerful things community organizers do is they teach people who have traditionally been underrepresented where their power lies. They teach them how to petition City Hall. They teach them how to block vote. They teach them how to use the power of the pen to make changes in their neighborhoods. Those community organizers aren't simply sitting around saying, hey, y'all, let's come to a community center and chat. They're actually teaching people how to access and use the levers of power to create change in their community. So when we talk about people not understanding the power of the vote, there are these people out here who do understand it, and they're trying to get more of us to participate in the system, because the system, when we participate in it, becomes very, very effective.
Or the flip side to the point of the clip is you have a lot of people preying on the fact that you want or trying to disenfranchise you, which again is always a risk. And I want to keep highlighting that the attempt to disenfranchise your vote actually proves what it's worth. You understand what I'm saying? That's what
100%.
That's that the KKK did what they did because it was like, wow, look at what they do. They got Harold Relevant in the Congress. We do not want these niggas putting people into power. They look at it as power, and it was an effort to disenfranchise your vote.
To this day, one of the most legendary orators in congressional history was a former slave voted during Reconstruction into the House of Representatives. This man was amazing. I want y'all to look him up. I'm not even gonna give you his name, because if y'all gonna watch us, do some homework and find out who that orator was, because I'm here to tell you that scared the living daylights out of the people who thought that would never be possible. And he was elected by Black voters during the Reconstruction, and that scared them so much that when the compromise that you mentioned happened, they went on a terror run to never let great men and women like him sit in Congress and have the effect and the influence that they did. You want to talk? I'll give you a little more homework for those who really want to get in some history real quick, Montoya. If you ever heard the term peanut gallery, look up the origin of that term, and you'll understand why Black orators and Black people were terrorized in the South. It wasn't simply because we were Black, but because we had the ability to wield amazing influence once we were put in those positions, and we did.
And let me give a little more historical context. I'll let you leave them on hanging on the actual name, but just so you know, if you're willing to do the homework, it's only one of 6 people, so it ain't gonna be that hard to find. But I'm highlighting that number for this reason. So when that compromise takes place, our people coming out of enslavement understood the power of the vote, that they get 6 people all the way to the highest offices in the land. Now, they were putting people locally all over too in their locales, but they got 6 people to the highest points of the land. Well, when that compromise takes place, it would be another 50 years before somebody looked like us got back in that position.
That's right.
Because that's to your point, Emille. That's how much they didn't want that happening, because
that's the power of the vote. And people, they're not spending billions of dollars for show. They're spending billions of dollars because they know, again, money flows into politics and money flows out of politics. Where that money goes is based entirely on your vote. And the question that I want people to start answering is, what has not voting gotten them? Because I know what it had historically. I have no argument for not voting. There is no historical argument for it. And there hasn't been a group of people who have made significant change in this nation by saying, I'm not voting. What they have done is vote fanatically in every election, and they have created incredible change relatively swiftly. Again, I'll go back to Reconstruction with you, and I'll tell you that the reason why those orators were so fearsome is because they were able to sway people with logic and emotion in ways that had not been done prior to their presence. And that was scary, because if they could do that as the formerly enslaved, imagine what happens when they get education and add to that oratorical tradition. And when I say oratory, I mean logic, emotion, and the ability to wield the spoken and written word with such command that they intimidated their peers in Congress, intimidated them.
Wow. So I pulled up this one clip, and this again I think gives a lot of context. We want to keep this at an hour, so we're going to go ahead and get out of this thing. But let's play this clip. I'll give you one response, and then we'll pop up on them again for the exit polls. Hopefully with our brother Shelly Winters on that one. I got to check and see if he can get on here with us. But I just think this clip really epitomizes some of our dialogue today.
Poll tax certificate from 1960. This is when we had to pay poll tax. You had to choose between feeding your family or voting. You only made $2 a week because you didn't have jobs that we have today. Okay. So a lot of us didn't vote because that was voter suppression. We decided to feed our family. What do? Vote or feed your family.
And what year was this, ma'am?
1960.
And this is yours?
This is my original.
Wow.
I have the original.
This is amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Original poll tax, dog. 1960. Let's put that in context. You remember, Last show, we were talking about how we romanticize how our communities were when we were segregated. $2 a week she was making in the 60s. We don't understand how abject poverty was for our community. 80% of our community was in abject poverty. She was making $2 a week, and she had a choice between, do I go vote this thing that I know I need to do, or eat? And we play with that. We actually mistakenly think that the Black Wall Streets and the Rosewoods were built up outside of the system. No, they control the locale just like the system allows. And then the North takes the military out in order for them not to get their equal protection. And they no longer get the amendments that were made for the, at the time, the men to be able to vote. They can no longer act on something that was in law. They didn't have equal protection. And so once another group could take advantage of it, they made sure we don't want that group voting. They're not taking it away if it has no power. And this efforts at all times, I'm not saying this to just us as a Black community, that we're the only people that are disenfranchised. That's part of politics. Different groups will disenfranchise whoever they think they need in a locale, or like we said, strategically overload a primary election to ensure they get who they want to have control and a seat at the table to get their agenda met. So you can use it both ways. You can disfranchise a group, or you can use your power to vote.
Super enfranchise a group. Absolutely.
At the right time, strategically. This is not me or Emille saying vote or die. You must vote just because your ancestors died. No, we've given you a lot of context of understanding why the vote matters.
I would never exclusively tell someone to vote because our ancestors died for the right.
Hell no.
That's a weak argument, in my opinion. What is the argument is, what do you want out of your agenda? And can you figure out how to make that agenda someone else's priority? And the only way I know how to do that within the system, and I'm a radical, so I will talk about without the system in another context, but within the system, voting is one of your most potent ways to do that. It is not the only way, as we said before. Activism comes in many flavors and many forms, one of which is voting. But to deny the power of the vote is to deny yourself access to one of the most powerful levers within the system that we have access to. I won't do it. I would never ask that of our people, because I know what the result of not voting gets us.
No, absolutely. And so I'm pulling up this one last clip. We're going to close the show with this. And this is just a reminder of how politically conscious our guesstimations, the predictions for the actual vote tomorrow. Again, we're encouraging anybody that's listening to us to get out and yield your power. I don't care who you're voting for. That's not my personal concern. Because I think it is a personal thing, right? Like, I think I know that big, what's that big commercial, that new commercial that caused all the uproar, where they're running the ad where the wife goes in and votes different than her husband. Like, that's causing a big thing right now. So I'm a big fan of personally voting how you choose, but to the concept of that the vote doesn't matter, or we will withhold our vote and get something, it absolutely works in the opposite direction. So I'm trying to upload this clip and close it out. All right, we out. See y'all on the next one at the exit polls. We're going to tell y'all what actually happened. If you're tired of the propaganda, listen to us. See y'all next time. And by what percent? So what's your prediction for the election? Because we saved it to the end. We lost.
Okay, so I'm gonna give you what I think is gonna happen in the Electoral College.
Okay.
I'll use the Electoral College.
Okay, gotcha.
Right. So I think you're gonna see about 320, 330 Harris and about 220 Trump. Whatever the 215 Trump. So it's 330, 215. That's where I'm thinking it's going to be about in the Electoral College. It's going to be about about 3-2 ratio for a win for Harris. I think people have slept on some of the things that she's done that are actually making a difference in the middle. because she's got so many Republicans who endorse her. And I don't know if that's a good thing, but I do know it carries weight in the middle because she's looking like someone that moderate Republicans can support, because a lot of moderate Republicans have said they're going to support her. And I think that's going to be the difference.
So the polls look razor thin. I'm shocked at your number. I actually think that it's going to be a 3 to 4% higher win for Trump. And the reason I say that is the foreign policy part of things. And our biggest budget, 20%, goes to the military, and there's still this perception. We have people inside of Trump's camp that have highlighted how well he's done on foreign policy while he was in government. We've also had people inside the camp who are no longer endorsing him that says he's terrible in the Situation Room. We got different things on that. But now the reality of things is perception is reality. And so
I agree that
I'm going to get my prediction. So I'm just highlighting that my prediction is not about where I'm voting, it's about the prediction.
But the reason
let me say this, let me say this. So the prediction is based on how much we spend on having the #1 military in the world. I think the perception will not allow enough people to put her in place because of how they perceive what America will be on the world stage. So I think that's
I absolutely can see that. And the only reason I say what I say is because I think the popular vote is going to be what you're talking about. The popular vote is going to be razor thin. The Electoral College, I think, is not. That's the difference.
So if the popular vote is razor thin, you think you can? Well, you can't get that big credit because of how they fall. Matter of fact, on the next Political Conscious, I'll do a video on Electoral College.
I stand by it.